Hel. She's both the ruler and the personification of the underworld, also known as Helheim in the Norse pantheon. And I thought this would be a fitting follow up to the Wrathful Compassion reading, where the initial vibe that I was getting from the significators was an underworld journey. But it just didn't feel quite right for that reading. And now that it's had a little bit of a chance to marinate, if you will, I wanted to explore that initial side of the coin that came out. And when in Rome, I wanted to do a Norse rune to open this up with. And this is Awaz. It means horse or travel. And this all together with these archetype cards is telling me underworld journey. And we might be getting into some pretty heavy themes, so I'm just going to give that initial trigger warning. Because I often talk in terms of like individuation and that confrontation with the shadow and things like that. But there's this other term that I've recently come across that actually seems to explain a lot of the spiritual side of things that doesn't get touched on so much in like the Western medicine and psychology and things like that. But it's the, I think it's Clepothic initiation or the Tree of Death initiation. It's like that, again, other side of the coin of the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life. And from what I've ascertained, it gets viewed in like this evil way, the Tree of Death. And I guess I just don't see things in quite that manner, in that good or evil. Like, yes, light and shadow, but that's more like ego in the unconscious mind and those things that we've shamed ourselves about, we've made a part of shame in our societal values and things like that. It's the parts of human nature that we don't want to accept, we don't want to explore, or maybe we just don't want to face our own capacity for unsavory things. So I'll start getting some cards out, explore this a little bit more, this underworld journey. And we also have Healer and Alethea. This is truth, like unforgetting, not oblivion. So those things that come up through underworld journeys, maybe things that aren't quite so pleasant. So what is the nature of this underworld journey? Got the Runic Tarot out here to stay on theme. And this is the Three of Cups. Your community, celebration, could be facing an addiction, you know, substance use, things like that. Maybe gluttony. But that was a big component of, actually a lot of components, of this long extended journey that I've been on. Probably about 6 years now. Individuation, so forth. But facing the reality of my social group and not what I wanted it to be. Not who I wanted those people in that group, in the family structure, to be. And those are some difficult expectations, projections, and so forth to let go of, because we all get this happy vision, I think, ingrained in us from an early age, at least here in the States, of this like idyllic, postcard worthy family that results in like Christmas photos that everybody's smiling in the photos, but it was a battle behind the scenes to get this all put together. A bunch of people that really aren't interpersonally compatible just kind of happen to be related to each other, which I think is something, an idea we don't explore very often. And so that might be some of that shadow work. And people often refer to healers in these scenarios as like light workers. That phrase has never resonated with me. It's really more of like a shadow worker, I guess, depending on what your approach is to things. Because the light, that's already what's visible, and it's the shadow that helps you correct the perceptions of what's in the light. Queen of Swords. It's a cool card. Very regal. Because she's usually looking off to the side in most decks, but here it's a more dead-on angle, like she's kind of tilted away, but it's still a ready to engage because the sword is up and her hand is out. Ready to take on the underworld journey without shying away from it, just ready to stare it in the face. And there's a big crow or a raven up there. Maybe some ancestral stuff, because I'm getting the Morrigan from that. You know, different pantheon. But the 3 snakes, there's that variation on, I don't know if it's not really the Triskelion, but the Triqueta, the Celtic knot, Irish knot. But the Druids were referred to as snakes. There's never been a snake population in Ireland. And I know for myself, I spent many years being proud of my heritage without really understanding it, without really understanding what it meant to be a descendant of an Irish immigrant and a lowlander Scot. Like, what, how does that all fit together? And there's so much devastating history there. The potato famine, the famine, quote unquote, the witch trials, which we learn about the Salem witch trials here in the States, but the Scottish ones kind of get brushed off, and they're far more vast. So maybe you're exploring your background a bit more. What is this? 7 of Swords. And the lies. The lies that were told about it. Because that was part of one of the rudest parts of this awakening. If you want to call it that. And that's such a funny phrase too, awakening. I see that as like breaking apart the conditioning, the propaganda and things like that. And just, the United States is a propaganda machine. And I didn't realize it until I was in my mid-30s, like how much, not only the wool had been pulled over my eyes, but it just been held there, held in place. And the only way, at least in my situation, I don't think this is true for everybody, but the only way for me to reconnect with my own internal compass, my own core values and things like that, was to get away, was to get space and just be able to hear myself without influence. It's weird how pervasive those wounds can be. Like, what's a phrase? You can't heal in the environment that you were harmed in. Sometimes, yes, that means the literal place. You know, if you're dealing with trauma and things like that, and you need to physically get away from where you were harmed, there's that aspect of it, but also the structures that you are harmed within, like a family structure, things like that. And so kind of a reckoning with not only the lies you were told, but how they were woven into your mental process in such a way that you became convinced that was your own voice, and that wasn't your authentic voice. That is conditioning from sometimes even generational trauma, things carried down generation to generation to generation. And somebody's got to do the work. But that doesn't mean at the end of this underworld journey that you'll be going back from whence you came. It's really not the idea. That's a lot of profound work just to sometimes like go backwards. I don't know. Not everything is repairable. Some things are. But what's something that's lurking down there that we might need to be aware of, kind of in the waters of the underworld? Because that can be a really, really difficult journey facing, for me it was anger. It's something I've dealt with a lot in my life, fight mode being my most difficult, most challenging mode to manage. But getting to the root of where that anger was coming from, and then not just stopping there. I feel like a lot of people stop at just being aware of it is enough. Not quite. There's a lot of acceptance of self and forgiveness of self that I think comes along with that journey, because I'm not one to say that forgiveness is required for healing, but really I'm referring to other people. You forgiving yourself for not knowing what you didn't know, not knowing any better, for trusting people with roles that carry implicit trust. Like, that's all really complicated stuff to work through. And stopping at awareness, that's not the work. And we've got the village here. It's kind of a similar art style in the background, that black and white. But it looks like they're drawing something with chalk. A little circle within a larger circle. The self within the group. Or it could even be the self within the psyche. Because that journey of recovery, it was like recovering the self from the underworld. I don't know if that makes sense. But so much of your life gets built on the persona when you grow up in trauma, that you become like decentralized from self. Not only decentralized in your own life, like you're not your own priority, but it's like your own actual center is off and you can't right your ship no matter what you do. And it takes those big journeys of self-discovery sometimes to like fully recenter, because maybe you've been in stormy seas your whole life. There's one thing I think that built up with shadow work for me was realizing how many people knew that things weren't okay and didn't do anything. I don't know if they felt powerless, they were powerless, but I still got harmed. There's no way around that. There's no like, well, I couldn't do anything. You know, maybe you could. Maybe we could have stepped it up a little bit more, because I went through a lot alone. And then once you get to those feelings of betrayal, that's where a lot of anger lives. It's a lot of theme on community, really. Village, and now we've got the Six of Cups, soulmate card, nostalgia. You know, this is that, oh, what's that painting? The Farmer's Daughter, or whatever. It's a really famous painting. It's a guy with the pitchfork, and probably can recognize it just from the little composition there. But the Village, we had the Three of Cups too. And it can feel very taboo to look around you, especially at people that you haven't had any sort of like major falling out with, that there were obviously good times with. Maybe they've helped you out with stuff, you know, and you can still move on from people that you've just grown apart. Be grateful for the good times and just recognize that paths have diverged, and the longer either of you try to hold on to that, you're just going to keep yourself in a place that's not meant for you anymore. But I'm also getting opinions. That might be another thing to look out for on this type of journey. These are not well understood in the Western world. I don't know about any world, but there's a lot of black and white thinking that goes into just kind of everything. I don't see a lot of space being held for like the both ands. That somebody could be going through a medical crisis and a spiritual crisis at the same time. And that was really difficult for me to navigate, so I didn't have anybody around me that did anything past like superficial spirituality. I was like basically picked up by the collar and thrown into the abyss by medical issues, by the near-death experience, and everything. And it turned my psyche inside out. And it was like the only way to get to the authentic self. The self that had been buried under decades of trauma. And I'm confident that the thing that saved my life was me going my own way. That if I had stayed in the opinions of others and been considering what they were saying and not betting on myself, I either wouldn't be here at all right now, or I would just be a zombied out, zonked out, bump on a log, irreversible damage, because I barely came back from what I went through. And going forward, I don't want to go back to the environments that led up to that. I want to get away. I want to go live my life, the life that I was never afforded. And I'm sure anybody else going through this right now, before, upcoming, are also going to go through those same complicated feelings of, because you hear like, oh, isolation is bad and whatnot, and I'm over here like, isolation saved my life. Page of Wands in reverse. It's a very combative energy, but in reverse, so like not fighting it anymore. And there's sunflowers on both of those cards. That's very like the self. But just not fighting it anymore, that certain relationships or environments just aren't for you. Accepting that conventional wisdom isn't the thing to do for your situation. A lot of people living with trauma go through that, because just the skills that are taught in like cognitive behavioral therapy, there's a lot of redirective skills and like coping mechanisms and things like that, whereas trauma work, EMDR and such, gets down to the root. And that's really what people need when you're dealing with trauma, because just redirection and coping skills can feel really triggering, because a lot of us have lived lives where we weren't allowed to have our feelings. We weren't allowed to express our feelings. And it can feel like those environments again, and can be really hampering to progress. And that was a big issue in my own journey, is other people had ideas, expectations and such of what I should do, how things should go. And they were also dismissing and invalidating that I really truly am living with complex trauma. So they were making recommendations that were harmful. And no, they're not clinicians, and they were not staying in their lane. But it was not, there was no way to ignore that I was visibly getting worse on that path. Like, I went to get help and I was getting worse and worse and worse under the treatment of doctors. And it's like I was in a room full of people just watching it happen. They weren't doing anything. It was just like, well, take more of this medicine. This medicine is obviously making me worse. Like there's something wrong, which I was having seizures. That is an important thing to figure out. Get me on the right medicine. But under no stretch of the imagination was I improving. And that was a big piece of my anger once I was able to piece myself back to a cogent person. Just looking back on all, like, my state of health, and like, you doubled down on that treatment plan? I know you could see and hear me. It was obviously not the right one. And we've got the Hermit in reverse. Isolation, yeah. And people refer to it in this bad way. And I have such mixed feelings on that just because of my own experience. And it seems like this taboo topic that a lot of people, I think, don't want to talk about. Because it's a lot of difficult truths that have to be discussed. That sometimes the most likable people, the people that come across as the most competent to doctors, are abusers. They're abusive, they're neglectful, they're arrogant, they're ignorant. And they would sooner double down on being right than actually assess the situation and go, oh, maybe I'm not taking the right approach to this by just like sticking to the conventional wisdom of do what the doctor says. Why? I'm not getting better. And I was so vulnerable. And I don't even know how to describe truly the state of being in my mind. It was a lot of things. But I do remember just being humored and not listened to about real concerns that I was bringing up. And this was to family, this was to friends, this was to doctors. Humoring people is not helpful. Listening to people is. And that was the most difficult part of the active process, was just like trying to be heard and trying to be heard, and I finally gave up. I went rogue. I went my own way, and it saved my life. And that's not for everybody to do, but I think there's a lot of voices out there that have similar experiences to mine with really nowhere constructive. I don't know if constructive is the right word, but to do something with that voice. Because we so readily get written off as crazy lunatics, like they're having a mental breakdown because they're revisiting spirituality or things like that. Like, it's not a good argument, especially not in a country with First Amendment. But it's a lazy argument. Like, that's not thinking critically about the situation at hand. So where does going our own way take this path? I know where it took mine, but because that, I think the real pitfall to look out for is like other people projecting their expectations on how things should be to you. And I think the marker now for myself is, am I experiencing distress? I'm the patient. And if somebody doesn't like what I'm doing, that's their business. They are allowed to feel that way. And believe it or not, if the medicine and such is making me worse, yeah, I'm going to be acting in ways I wouldn't otherwise. And that was another thing that just blew my mind. Like, I've never acted this way in my entire life, and we doubled down on what that doctor was saying? Really? I don't know. But that was one of those betrayal wounds that was brought up and recreated and reopened and whatnot throughout my own journey. Was like, I'm hearing these words that we want me to get well, but from where I'm sitting, it's like you can't see and hear me. Like, that's not, one of these things is not like the other. The temple, but it flipped out in reverse. It could be people taking issue with maybe your belief system. That's one of the things I've wondered as I splintered off on my own. Like me revisiting and coming back out of the broom closet. Because there's, what's it called? Triangulation. If it's like the first story that's heard is the one that's believed. And even when, like, if I were to come in and provide the correct details or additional context or whatnot, it probably wouldn't matter. So, like, why waste my breath? Because I don't know if any of my caregivers are mentioning, like, oh, by the way, we called her names. Like, we tore into her at home, and, like, while she was trying to do homework, we were screaming at each other in the background and expecting her to have good grades. Not only expecting her to, but punishing her if she didn't. And then creating this absolutely chaotic environment at home where you become an extension of, at least in my case, two antagonistic personalities. And I had no relief. No siblings, no extended family, no anything like that. And so it's like when you express yourself through belief system, through like punk rock, like whatever the thing may be, you are a piece of them that's misbehaving. It's like they can't get their arm to do what it's supposed to do. It's a very dehumanizing experience. And then to not be able to articulate to like people in authority, whatever, how different they are in front of them versus after the door closes. And it, yeah, I can kind of see how it sounds crazy, manipulative, like whatever derogatory terms we want to assign to that. But who else is going to know besides that kid? There is no other voice on the face of the planet that can tell you that what that kid is saying is true. Now there's cameras and stuff. There wasn't when I was growing up, but and are they even going to allow that? Probably not. Why would they, any sort of antagonistic guardian, what have you, why would they allow them an opportunity to break down the perception that they've created? That's a threat to self. What is this? Four of Wands? But it's in reverse, an unhappy home. And Knight of Wands. Very fiery. That's like distorted anger. Excessive anger. This hurts me more than it's going to hurt you. That's not true. Actually, for anybody who's maybe even not necessarily gone through actual physical issues at home, but even the threat of physicality, it still leaves the same scars in your mind, the same trauma, the same fundamental changes in your brain. Is like, I used to think this is like an interesting example for shadow work. I used to think I'm bad at math. I'm not. I think it's called dyscalculia. I can't do math in my head. It's just like nothing happens when I try to do math in my head. But when I was growing up, it was, you're not living up to your potential. You're not applying yourself. You're just not trying hard enough. Like all these criticisms, when what I was dealing with was a learning difference. But like the example of you are an extension of them, that type of personality doesn't see you as different than them. Like they can't conceptualize that your brain works differently than them, than theirs, because you're not a different person than them. You're an extension of them. And I get, like most of my memories between 7 and 12 are missing, but I remember this one. Threatened with, I'm going to stand over you with a stick until you finish your math homework. Why are you threatening your kid? Like, how about you try helping them? That, I don't get that. To me, that just screams a weak adult. Someone who uses fear to rule over their domain, that can't contain their own temper, can't manage their own stuff. So they just take it out on their kid and then create behavioral issues in them and then go, well, they're the problem, obviously. Like, not the adult creating the environment, facilitating the environment. Clearly, it's the child who has no power. And that's these conversations that nobody wants to have because it breaks down that belief of, like, the morality of a parent. And I think that's actually a really important perception to break down, because people really need to start believing that parents can do bad things, because it protects children when we get over ourselves and look at things as they are, not as we wish them to be. The Tower. And it's gonna rock some foundations. Justice, yeah. Ooh, Fenrir in the back. Tyr. The warrior god. What intense cards, wow. Such a cool deck. Another winner from Los Garebo. And I know I talk about my own experiences, my own examples and whatnot a lot. But I want to provide the space I didn't have, you know, going through this. And I think more and more people, the more spices, the more spaces they can find where people are relating to what they're going through, can help them start their own spaces. Might not necessarily be something like this, but whatever it is that they do. And it kind of creates a chain. Like, one person gets up on the shore and then is able to reach back and grab one more person, and then it's one more person. We're lifting each other up. Because there are so many people, they're just like me, that went through traumatic things for decades and were gaslit into being told it was normal. That that's just how things are. That, well, parents have a tough job. Yeah, I know. That's why you gotta have some real consideration when it comes to being a parent. I'm not saying that it's easy. Saying that you're forming a psyche of a tiny human, and that's a really big responsibility. And it gets, I don't know, taken for granted, I guess. I don't know if that's really the right phrase, but how do you protect those kids? Education, experiences, sharing experiences. Because there's all sorts of bad stuff on the internet, which means there's room for all sorts of good stuff too. So what's the good stuff coming out on the other side of this underworld journey? So I'm bringing up a lot of heavy stuff. Like I said I would. Trigger warning and all that. So what's the good? Because sometimes it can feel very hard to find the good. And it can feel really patronizing to hear, like, the gratitude stuff. Because there isn't always something to be grateful for. Like, trauma is trauma. It just kind of is what it is. the lives would arguably be much easier without it. And sometimes what you need are those spaces to just be authentic, where you don't have to put a smile on your face and like this whole positive mental attitude, love and light and things like that. It's okay to be mad. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to actually fully experience both sides of the coin. You know, the tree of life, the tree of death, the light and the dark, the ego and the shadow. People are so ready to push away one half of human experience just because it's hard. It's okay for things to be hard. Got the queen. Got another snake too. But it came out reversed. So this is the good. Maybe, like Princess Diana just came to mind. That she went against the grain. And she wanted to be her authentic self. And you could tell how restrained she was by like royal expectations and things like that. So maybe this is you taking your crown off. Or this is the underworld crown, you know, since it's in reverse. But taking off the expectations or the weight of the expectations of society. Of what you're supposed to be. Of how you're supposed to learn. How your brain's supposed to work and things like that. Your brain works the way it works. And there's this like fervent desire for homogeny in our society, and I don't understand why. I mean, my tinfoil hat moment is because it makes us easier to mold and control and things like that, get everybody to fall in line. But outside of that, like, you lose so much when you demand people to assimilate, to abandon their cultural background for just some diluted, buy some cheap party favors one day in March when everybody thinks they're Irish and we go right back to the status quo and ignoring the actual history behind these things. So detaching yourself from expectations, that is a prize. A prize with no price. Because it's not only priceless in and of itself, but it costs a lot to get there. To go through that underworld journey, individuation, however it plays out for you. There's that wind again. She's angry. Just the sense that I was getting. The Emperor and Ace of Wands in reverse. The artwork is so cool. So interesting. The Queen and the Emperor. Unification of the shadow and the light. I'm trying to get away from the gendered language. The divine feminine and the divine masculine and things like that, because it forces everybody into a binary. And I don't know, Carl Jung was a product of his time, talking about the animus and the anima. There's got to be more space for a little essentialism, you know, at least in my eyes. Rejection of an idea. You are now the... What's that movie? I am the captain now. You're the captain. You're the captain of your ship. And I think a really big... This might sound silly, but a really big step in complex trauma work is realizing and absorbing and accepting that we're the grown-up. And not in a bad way, like, oh my god, everything's up to me. Why? There is that piece of it. but more of the, yes, there was a time where I was disadvantaged in like the power dynamic, especially if you're dealing with not an actual hierarchy, but a perceived one, like a family structure. I mean, there is actual power stuff, we're talking about Princess Diana. But just in a more general, non-royal sense, they're not in control of a bunch of resources and all this. Getting out of that relational dynamic, I guess would be the way to put it. It can take a lot of work, but a shift starts to happen where you can respond to maybe family members, friends, whatnot, as if you would respond to any random stranger on the street trying to start trouble with you. Like, would you just allow that to occur? Probably not. In a family dynamic, there might still be that trigger for like the fawn response and whatnot, but that's where the shadow work is. Knowing where the root of those things are, so that if conflict occurs, you don't regress back into whatever age might be coming up. It's like, it's not necessarily like 13 or 7 or whatnot, but like teenager, young child, like phases more than ages. But you start to feel that different age, like in your adult body. But as you go along in the process, do more shadow work, do more trauma work, and get to the root of things, your actual age starts to become more solid with the age of your body. Which might sound weird if you're not living with trauma, but those emotional flashbacks, those are a wild ride. And I did briefly mention like interpersonal compatibility. That's something that I think I heard Dr. Ramani talk about. But like the likelihood that you're actually like socially compatible to someone you are related to isn't actually all that high. There's like the expectation of society that you just get along with your family. Why? Why would we think that? We have different backgrounds. They might be from a completely different place. Might just innately have different values, different personality types. Why would we be de facto compatible? Could just be leftover from evolutionary times. Like, if you weren't compatible, you need to get compatible because you weren't going to make it on your own back then. It's a little bit different now. It's a lot more possible to go it on your own, which might be why it seems like kind of a strange idea, because it is kind of novel, being able to be entirely self-sufficient, or as darn near close to it as you can get. And we've got the Hierophant. That kind of, I mean, it's giving me Jesus vibes. I have to read the book on that one to see if it's actually him. But I mean, it's just giving me the, like, what we know about the Druids is from the Christian monk perspective and a random sampling of those documents at that. And we've got the Seven of Wands in reverse and the Seven of Cups. Interesting. Another, looks like a gathering with a group. But that's normally the illusion card. Is that Balder? Maybe. Would fit. It's an interesting mix. It's got me thrown for a loop a little bit, but 2 7s. Not maintaining your position. Maybe not maintaining the position of old, of what the structure you came from, the illusions that were painted for you from there, being willing to drop those values, drop those principles. Because it's got a very transcendence vibe to it. And more travel, another reference to travel, the Rhytho rune. So transcending the ideas, the expectations from whence you came. I like that phrase a lot. And becoming the emperor. That's the Aries energy, the body identity. Unifying the mind, the self, all of the things. And what a reward for that to be the good thing. I know it's not the only thing that's needed in life. I feel like people skip over the whole, like, money thing. Things cost money. People need money. We can't just spiritual our way through everything because there's no temples for the oracles anymore. And we have to pay rent and things like that. But maybe you're venturing out on a path never explored now that you have regained or are regaining connection to the authentic self. Because there's such an expectation just forced on, it's like myself and all the people around me, like growing up, that is just the thing that you do, that you go to school, you get a job, maybe you go to college, maybe you go to the military, like you do something, but you kind of fall in this pipeline that most people fall into. And it's such a destructive and exploitative pipeline because it's just rows and rows and rows of hamster wheels. How are we ever supposed to make progress? It's one of the many reasons I don't do hierarchies, because we are losing so much potential, so many good ideas, so much diversity to just go to your hamster wheel. Like, this is where you belong, little human. It's not. We're more medicated and depressed and anxious than we've ever been. This is not the world that we evolved for. Of course we're reacting to it. It's not... We have no freedom. It's like trying to contain a horse. But I think that's enough of my rambling. So a lot of complicated stuff that comes with the underworld journeys. But at the end, the hope is reestablishing connection, not only with the authentic self, but really the ability to hold your boundaries. That emperor energy of, you know, I worked really hard at working through wounds that were never my own, wounds that other people bestowed upon me, gifted to me, because they couldn't handle it. So they never dealt with it. So they made it my problem. And now that I've salved those, healed those walls are well manned. And it's okay if you've got a problem with that. I'll just take the bottom one. Barbenheimer, because that's technically two. Unification of two sides, the light and the dark. The Barbie movie and Oppenheimer. And the order in which I watched these was, well, it was a blizzard, so I wasn't going anywhere. So it was Gummy Bear, Oppenheimer, which I got super into partway through that movie. Didn't even realize like how into it I was. But then break for lunch, another Gummy Bear, and then the Barbie movie. You know, like lift the mood back up. And then it was surprisingly existential. So maybe you need some sort of movie marathon day, whatever your choice. I mean, I think this is a good choice. But something contrasted, maybe. I just watched Underworld because I was talking about it in the last reading. And then you could contrast that with something like Airplane, like something completely different. Balance out the scales a little bit. But really just give yourself a break. Because these type of journeys, they're really hard. And I know in my experience, they go on for a long time. And there's no test at the end. They take as long as they take. And you deserve to give this journey as much attention as it requires. Because all the good that will come at the end of you returning to self, can't put a price on that. But overall, I hope this helps. I hope this resonates, and if it doesn't, I hope the next one does. Thank you so much.